Hi, Dr. Lupa Kaila. Maybe we'll wait for a few more minutes so that students can join.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Thanks, Dr. Jahan, for starting the video. Recording.
No problem. And you can carry out whenever you want to start. Yeah, carry on. Yeah.
Should we start now? Maybe Dr. Jahan, as usual, if you give the general introduction, then I can go ahead and then we can give it to the speaker.
Okay, now we can start. It's the time. So thank you everyone for joining today. And we are hosting an event with WIDS, and as an organizer of WIDS, Priya did a good job. She organized the entire event. I'm giving her the floor to introduce our presenter to us and carry on. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Dr. Jahan. Hello, everyone. I just wanted to add that thanks to Dr. Jahan and Dr. Shamsuddin, who is also my mentor here and a co-ambassador, and also Dr. Jahan, who is organizing the colloquium and then helping me with the lead. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about our speaker. So we welcome a special guest, Dr. Lupa Khaila. A little bit about her. She is the director of data analytics in College of Education and Human Sciences, and she served as a data consultant for Alpha Gamma, Delta Fraternity, and National Association of Campus Activities. And she is a faculty for educational psychology. She served as research and scholarship group chair for National Association of Campus Activities. And she is a finalist for 3-minute thesis competition for OSU Graduate College in 2021, and also the recipient of the prestigious 2022 Women's Faculty Council Student Research Award and People Choice Award. So now today she's going to talk about how to utilize predictive models and construct measurement to aid student success. And Dr. Lupa Kaila, I'm opening the floor to you. It's all yours.
Thank you very much. So I prepared some slides, so I'm going to try to share my screen. So bear with me one second.
Sure.
Okay, can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Okay,
Everyone
perfect.
can see it.
Okay, so when Priya asked me to speak about being a woman working in data science, I was really excited about that. I think that is something I am passionate about, is mentoring women, and particularly in data science. I'd say my experience, my introduction included that a couple student awards. So I recently graduated with my PhD in 2022. So I'd say my career in data science is very young, very definitely kind of, I've had a job for many years, but working in data science specifically, I definitely am an entry-level professional. So I thought that I'd be able to talk to that piece of it and kind of starting out, and maybe have some advice or tips in that regards for folks on the call. So I'd say, thinking about specifically being a woman in data science, I think it's enjoyable because I have this title, Director of Data Analytics, and so I support the entire College of Education and Human Sciences. And I think when folks they just interact with me via email and stuff, and then they meet me in person, I can tell almost every time that they're really surprised, how young I am, but then also I think that I'm a pretty friendly, outgoing, charismatic woman. I think that's just not what they're expecting when they think of, I'm going to go talk to the person who's crunching all my numbers. So I enjoy that surprise, I think, but I do think it's a piece that I always am navigating as well too. Sometimes I think I feel some imposter syndrome or different pieces like that. So I do a lot of self-talk of kind of lifting myself up and reminding myself of my experience. So that's kind of the first piece I wanted to talk about with my slides, is my career path and that experience that I do lean on. So today I'll talk about my career path, some of the prediction models that I use in my job. If going into higher education, working as an administrator is maybe something you're interested in, that might be of interest to you. And then I thought I'd share about my personal research, kind of the thing that I'm passionate about, what makes me most excited in the data science world. It isn't predictive models, and so it's more measuring constructs, but I'll share a little bit about a measurement tool that I created. So my career path. So I am a first generation graduate, and I have this drawing on here because there's just always been something since I was a little tiny kid, like first grade. I won a coloring contest where you had to draw what you wanted to be when you grew up. And I drew a picture of being a college professor. I mean, my parents didn't have degrees. I have no idea how I even really knew what that was. But I think I've just always known from being a tiny kid that I loved school. I just always wanted to be in a school setting. And so I've explored a lot of different options within the higher education world, kind of once I reached that point of going to college. So I started my academics at Friends University, just a small school up in Wichita, Kansas. And I originally went there. I was going to get my bachelor's in business administration, and I was going to open a piano bar and a recording studio. What 18-year-old me thought why I wanted to do that, I'm not quite sure. So that's what my major was when I started. But I was in a statistics class my first semester, and it was my favorite class. I loved it. I loved doing the homework. And so I very quickly said, I just want to be in math classes for all 4 years. That's the type of work I want to be doing. And so I switched my major to mathematics. Now, what I wanted to do for a career changed a lot. I had an on-campus job in the student or in the library. And so for a while, I thought I might want to be a university librarian. I did enjoy my math classes, so I probably spent about a year thinking I might be a math professor. But the whole time I was there, I mentioned it's a really small school. There's only about 900 students there. I was very involved in leadership roles on campus. And so I was the president of our programming board, which plans events on campus. That gave me a seat in student government. And ultimately, that's where I kind of landed is I really liked that mentorship piece, etc. So I decided to go get my master's in higher education and student affairs from the University of Arkansas, where I had a graduate assistantship in new student and family programs, and I did a lot of working with orientation, etc. But even then, I think I was still interested in the math part of it. I definitely was drawn to projects that involved doing assessment work or how can I measure the impact that we're making with our programs. I enrolled in classes, as many as I could, that were oriented in that for my master's. And then graduating from there, I worked at Truman State University for a couple of years. And then I eventually got a job in 2016 here at OSU. And so if you're familiar with the Student Union Activities Board, that was my first job here at OSU. I was the coordinator for that organization. And getting started, I very quickly volunteered to serve on our assessment committees, et cetera. And I thought about getting my PhD in higher education, but I met with them and I was like, I just don't know that that's what I want to study in the classroom. And so I decided I was going to wait. But then somebody in that committee was like, have you heard of the REMS program? And I was like, no, tell me more. And so I met with some of the faculty, which is the educational psychology program. REMS is one of the concentrations. And I immediately was like, I know this is the best fit for me. Like, this is what I want to do. These are the types of classes I want to take. So that's how I kind of ended up in there. So my background is in student affairs, which is, I guess, some people would refer to student affairs maybe as the party planners or the warm, fuzzy pieces of it. But I could tell from my work with event planning and leadership development, I truly believed in my heart that we were making a difference. And so it was my goal to prove that with data. And so being able to demonstrate, the reach that we had with types of students, maybe different identities, but then also how can we make improvements to our programs? How do we measure those types of things? So that's kind of where my passion lies. And then when I graduated in 22, my advisor learned that they had just created this new office of data analytics for the college. and they were looking for a director. And so she was like, this sounds like a perfect job for you. So I applied for that, and I'm very excited that I got that role. So the past 2-ish years, I've been serving in that. It's a brand new office, brand new role. And that's something I also have enjoyed, is kind of developing what that looks like, and being able to show the support that is possible when you have somebody that just focuses on data analytics, somebody that has a very robust understanding of different data models and what's possible, etc. But then doing that interpretation piece. So I have a slide later on that I'll talk a little bit more about that. But I think that's the part of it that I really enjoy, is having an advanced skill set, and something that, you know, a lot of the world is, oh, I don't like math, or I'm not good at math, etc. And so I really enjoy being able to interpret that or teach that in a way that the average person can understand and at least appreciate, and utilize in their work. So I find that that's what a lot of my job is. Now, thinking about my future, I mentioned I'm very young in my career, so I think I don't know, there's a lot of possibilities of where I may go within data science, but I do think that my shift from student affairs to data analytics, I will stay in data analytics likely for the rest of my career. I think that could look a lot of different ways, but I'm interested potentially in working in institutional research type fields and roles. And yeah, that's a little bit about me. Before I go into predictive models, I want to stop and see if there are any questions just about me, my experience, my career path, etc.
Anyone has any questions? I think probably at the end we can see, like, maybe it was an interesting journey though. I just
Yep.
really love the way you talked about mathematics and stuff. So I think
Yeah.
data analytics and predictive starts with statistics and math, and I think students will be like kind of scared about math and things, and this is a very good example and motivate them, like, how to just cross over the milestone.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you can continue, Dr. Kayla.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so thinking about prediction models. So there's a few that we use primarily in my work currently. So I mentioned my office is pretty new. So I think that we have a lot of potential. I think the university as a whole is starting to, they have the right people in place to understand and appreciate the power that predictive models have for our work. So I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see more of these. So we do some predictive models trying to project what our enrollment numbers are going to be for the next year. I'd say the primary focus right now is on undergraduate students. So if you're familiar with the strategic plan that Dr. Shrum has for the university, we had that goal of hitting 5,000 new students, which we actually accomplished this year, but I imagine we want to continue to grow that. And so predictive models are able to look at all kinds of variables, whether that's kind of the state of people in Oklahoma, what the graduating classes look like, how our recruitment is going in regards to out-of-state students, the number of applications we receive, the number of people we admit, all kinds of things. So that's a really important one that we look at pretty frequently. I send weekly reports on what our enrollment numbers are, what they look like, and then we kind of look monthly. Now, the institutional research, their predictive models that you might actually hear about in a meeting, they're only confident enough in those that they look at the entire university new class. And so you might hear some of that. I look at some of more down to the program level, so looking at specific majors, etc. But those are very internal oriented. They don't have an incredibly high confidence level within them, but they help us continue to have conversations rather than having that conversation without any data informing it, etc. Another thing that we look at a lot is trying to predict academic success. And so, the ACT, GRE are tools that have existed for many, many years that are attempting to predict how well students will do in college, graduate school, etc. Personally, I don't personally love the ACT GRE mindset, but it is something that attempts to standardize as much as you can across the entire world of higher education. So there's a lot of pieces within that, and those scores can be included in predictive models to kind of determine, you know, how many graduates they may have, or just what that, I guess, kind of line of thinking where we're going. We also look at a lot of high school variables, things like GPAs, if they're from rural districts, if all kinds of makeup, what their demographics are, et cetera, and try to really build support programs. Maybe that's the grant funding or even funding that we have through the university to both identify needs that exist, but then also which students will most benefit from those support programs, rather than necessarily thinking that they're going to know that for themselves. So we use some predictive models there. Probably the strongest and what I think is the most interesting predictive model that we have is called Aide. So Aide is a company that we pay to run a large predictive model for us. And I have this QR code on here that takes you to the webpage where the university shares a little bit more about the Aide project. But we essentially send them 300 plus variables that we have on our students. So we have an insane amount of data on our students, almost to like a creepy level if you think about it too hard. But we send all this to them, and then they run a lot of different models. A lot of them are kind of time oriented. So, you know, we try to predict if their likelihood of returning for the spring semester, like right when they start in the fall, maybe after, you know, the first bursar bills are due. We do one after midterm grades come in. We do one after the withdraw date. And so we're looking at different models at all these different points in time. And we and they adjust the model based on which variables are impacting the most within the time period or the types of students that you're looking at. And then we're able to share some of that information with our advisors or with our different support administrators, and it helps inform some of the priorities that they establish and that type of thing. So on my next slide, I've got some ways that I help practitioners use these models and understand them. So where I have a more deep understanding of how these models are calculated, how they're changing, et cetera, are many of our administrators aren't going to understand that piece, nor do they necessarily need to. They need someone to interpret it for them and help them have those conversations. So that's a lot of the role that I play. So some of the things that I use these for is to help our recruiters understand which programs are needing more help. Kind of, you know, if we see that enrollment is predicted to be down in certain areas, they can increase their recruitment efforts in those, and kind of either that or maybe find some low-hanging fruit. I track the growth of programs and use data to advocate for more resources. In our college, a couple examples include our nursing program. Our nursing program is 2 years old, and it is astronomically just grown out of this world. And I think everybody knows, like, oh yeah, it's going to be huge. But me as a data person looking at our predictive funnels, I'm like, I don't think you understand how big this is going to be. And so I'm able to bring that data into the conversation and make sure that we're being proactive rather than reactive after they get here. Applied exercise science is one that is also growing at a rapid pace. And so that shows up in the data, and we're able to see that, and you're able to advocate better for different resources and programs when you're able to show those models to folks. Another thing I mentioned in the last slide is that we use the data to develop programs, maybe like a tutoring program or STEM camps in the summer prior to students showing up. And we're able to identify the students who would most benefit likely from those programs. So that's really helpful for us when we have limited resources to be able to make the most impact potentially. And without all of that data, you know, we're just kind of throwing things at the wall and hoping that it sticks. So it really helps us make some wise decisions for where we want to focus. We're able to also narrow down variables with the most impact on retention and work with those advisors, the retention specialists, to remove those barriers. One that you think about it in common sense, and we would be able to do something about it, is those outstanding bursar bills. And so a student, if they're not able to pay off a bill, then they're not able to enroll in class. And there's all kinds of reasons why they may not be able to pay off that bill. And so we're able to see potentially things like that come up within the model and say, if we can just eliminate these bills, their chances of coming back the next semester, the next year, etc., increases astronomically. And we're able to prove that through the data. And so that also helps us be able to establish priorities and then be able to use our resources to make the most significant impact, which is exciting. And then I do a lot of other interpretation tasks. To be honest, a lot of my work, I'm just doing really basic numbers, like this is how many people are enrolled in your program. But you'd be surprised how many people, the second you show them a spreadsheet, they're like, I can't read it. I don't know. So I think that's part of the piece that I enjoy the most. While I'm not writing code and doing a ton of work with like developing the models, I get to use models created by other people or all kinds of data, and I get to help people insert that into the conversations where it needs to be. And so one of the reasons I was excited to share that is because I wanted everybody to know like that jobs like this exist. And so if that brings you joy, or if that's something you're passionate about, there's definitely opportunities out there to be able to be kind of like that interpreter role, and it brings me a lot of joy. So yeah. And then I think my next thing was to talk a little bit about sense of belonging, but that really shifts from predictive models. So are there any questions or anything regarding prediction models, maybe what I've shared a little bit about the work that I do within my job?
Anyone has any questions right now? Or I think we can ask at the end of the session.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so shifting gears, my sense of belonging is the construct that I determined I wanted to create a measurement tool for my dissertation. So, and I was telling somebody, I was like, I haven't talked about this in this format in a few years, so bear with me if if I stumble over any of it. But I think it's cool that we can measure constructs. They're kind of these warm, fuzzy things that they're different for each person. So how do we, I think, quantitatively, and so how could we potentially measure and at least show growth or a change in something that's really interesting to me. And so and I also think a lot of those variables, if your measurement tool is created well and validated, that they can help inform those prediction models. They can be an additional variable you include in the conversation. So I wanted to create a survey to measure sense of belonging, but I wanted it to come from the student's perspective. So a lot of the research out there on sense of belonging is very clinical, very psychology oriented, almost prescriptive of like telling someone else, this is what it feels like if you belong. Whereas I approached it from a sense of belonging as a very personal experience. And I think also belonging, if we're going to measure it, it can look different in different organizations. So belonging to a university looks different than belonging to a church, looks different than belonging to your job, etc. And so I wanted my instrument to be very focused on like measuring the student's perspective of belonging to the university. So I initially did a qualitative phase prior to writing my measurements tool, where I asked simply, what 10 words come to mind when you think of belonging to your university? And I used that, and I did in vivo coding and thematic clusters to kind of analyze what all the words that students reported. So then once I had all these words, I made a beautiful word cloud and all kinds of stuff. I used those words to then write the items for my instrument. So I isolated the words and phrases that were submitted more than once. As long as it was submitted twice or similar words, then I wrote an item for it. I compared to other instruments to see if there were already items out there that maybe had already been tested. I should include some of those. And then I wrote both a negative and positive item for each of the 68 words that were listed at least twice in my qualitative phase. And then I did selected a random even spread of both positive and negative items to ensure some of that bias. I also my advisor, Dr. Kai Cole, she is really interested in item response theory. So we're hoping to do some additional analysis also on how those different positive and negative items work within the survey and some of our data. So ultimately, after going through that process, I had a survey that had 68 items. Over here on the right, I've got all the themes that they were kind of lumped together in. So things that you would expect, maybe things like relationships, your feelings, things that you gain, but then also things that were really common were school-specific jargon. Like I'm pretty sure Mike Gundy was listed twice, which blows my mind because that's not what I think of when I think of belonging. But even places showed up, physical things, etc. So there were all kinds of themes that existed within those items. So I administered my survey at 3 universities, and essentially this is kind of my quantitative phase. And then my analysis that I did was a principal components analysis, and I'll walk through that a little bit. So these are kind of the steps, and my goal in showing this to you with the specifics, I apologize, you can probably hear my dog barking in the background. But if this process seems interesting to you, to know that there's work in that field as well. So that's my main goal in showing all these steps. So I administered the survey, I cleaned the data, I removed all of the incomplete responses. If there was a large response of does not apply, I removed those because they simply weren't going to perform well when I did the principal components analysis. Most of them had to do with things like I'm in a student organization, I have a job. Many of those things in my sample were people that essentially didn't apply to. So those got dropped off of the survey. Next, I took a look at my demographics of who responded to kind of see what my sample looked like and if I needed to continue gathering data, etc. You'll see here in gender that 70% of my respondents were women, which is very common in survey distributions. That women, which maybe that's something to look into in women in data science, that women are just more willing to take a survey, I think. We had a pretty even spread in class level of the number of credit hours that students had, and so that was exciting to me to see. And then at the time that I was collecting data, the students enrolled in class, some of them started right before the COVID pandemic and some of them started during. So I thought maybe later I would want to ask some questions of if there was a difference between when a student started. So I differentiated between that and I think I've likely only had about 1 year of students who would have started before the pandemic when I did this. So that kind of shows in the data as well. I looked at first generation status within here to see if I wanted to ask any questions. And then all 3 of the universities that I administered my survey were predominantly white institutions. So the breakdown of race ethnicity was not surprising to me. And so we continued to move forward that it's kind of in line with what those university demographic makeups are. So then starting that actual principal components analysis, the first thing I did was to check your assumptions. So I checked appropriateness of conducting the principal components analysis, and they all checked off. I did decide to do a Promax rotation because I theorized that likely my components would be correlated. So move forward with those decisions. And then I did a couple models to kind of see where the cutoff should be and the number of components that existed within my survey. So these are the initial numbers that I found here when I ran those 2 different models. And then my next step was to start making modifications, essentially to start removing items. So these three items, or two, I only had two items that didn't load onto any of those components. I decided to remove both of those. I do not enjoy being on campus, and my university feels big. They were just kind of outliers hanging out over here by themselves. Then I reran the models to see if the numbers improved. And then I looked at, I wanted to have the strongest coefficient alphas that I could have. And so this is right here, the initial where all of these items loaded onto which component, which are the 4 components. But there were a handful of them that loaded onto multiple components. So I moved them around and saw how the Cronbox Alpha performed, and ultimately decided, you'll see here, like 23 were on component 1, and I ended with 20 here, and I only lost this much, but I was able to improve these two by that much by moving some things around. So I moved those within the components. And then I also removed 3 items that simply didn't improve the coefficient alpha. The student body is divided at my university. I seek out the opportunity to attend parties with other students at my university, and my day-to-day schedule is busy. And so here you'll see what I determined the 4 components were called. One of them is feelings, which I think we would expect to find. Social connections, so that one's very relationship oriented, all of those items are. School spirit was actually its own component. So a lot of those things are sports based, but then there's also things like I'm proud to be a student at my university, like I have pride, etc. And then academic focus and support. So there are some pieces in here that are very focused on the classroom, that are focused on faculty, etc. So they kind of lump together into their own component as well. So ultimately, this next slide kind of talks about thinking about scoring the instrument. So when you administer it, so you can do 4 separate subcomponent scores, and you can see my averages are over here. They have different numbers in each component, but you could say you wanted to just look at feelings, you could just take those 20 items and give that piece of it if you wanted to. But you can calculate subcomponent scores as well as the overall score of all 54 items that I ended up with in my survey. And then I thought this would be kind of interesting to look at in the world of all the surveys out there about sense of belonging, how mine kind of fits in, because there are some that already existed. So this is a comparison of most of them are generic or focused on the K through 12. There is one other university student survey out there. Mine is much longer. And so I think what mine adds to the literature is something that's a little more comprehensive, a little more holistic of the whole experience. But what mine also does, and I think it makes sense, is it's from the perspective of the student, not the perspective of somebody that simply works with students. And so I think students would tell you and describe their belonging experience much broader than maybe somebody who's trying to hone in on one thing. So I think that's where we see. But also you can see a lot of similar methods were used in order to create these instruments. So I thought that was interesting to look at. And then I also compared all of the existing sense of belonging surveys out there and the components that came out of them. And so these are my 4 here at the bottom, and they look similar. None of this doesn't go together in the idea of sense of belonging, but they're kind of measuring different things. So like this one over here is talking about acceptance and rejection. So those are likely positive worded items, and acceptance, rejection is probably negative worded. And that's definitely a piece of belonging. And so it kind of depends on maybe either your theory behind why you're measuring belonging, or just what you plan to use that survey for, to pick which one might be the most appropriate in your situation. But I thought it was interesting to see them all kind of laid out together. And then ultimately, how I hope that my survey is used is that, or you can use it, is to include the final 54 items in a survey. So you could depending on maybe your research question or just what you're investigating, you could add other constructs, like maybe you want to look at sense of belonging and grit together. So add some questions that would measure grit. Or maybe you're interested in combining two of the sense of belonging surveys. There's a lot of ways that you could kind of make your own to explore. You can calculate those subscores with a simple average of the items for each component. Since there are positive and negative worded items, you would have to make sure that you reverse code one or the other, and then making sure that your further analysis has sound methodology. So I have intentions of continuing to further validate. My hope and my expectation is that the 54 items would actually decrease some if I continue to draw samples and continue to do that process and kind of refine the tool. But it can be used in a lot of different ways. So my last thing for you is to kind of share, okay, I graduated in 2022. Now what, and I made this survey. Now what am I doing with it, or what do I hope to? So one thing is we are conducting a longitudinal study here at the university, and we've gathered 3 semesters of data. So we're using last year's freshmen as our cohort and administering the survey each semester. We're interested at looking at it from if it changes over time, etc., or maybe connecting it with them attending events. So we have all this data when you swipe your ID at different things, or you check in at the Colvin to work out, are there correlations there between sense of belonging scores and doing things in semesters, etc. We've been starting to advocate to add the sense of belonging scores to the student profile in that OTHOT prediction model that I mentioned. So I'm hoping that it can be kind of one of those pieces that we look at and able to do some prediction. My hope is being able to see a student's sense of belonging score, maybe even those 4 subcomponents, as an advisor would be able to get a sense of how a student's feeling, maybe have some ideas, like if they're really low in school spirit, okay, maybe they hate football. So what would you be proud of? How do we get you involved in that, etc. I've also been approached by National Association for Campus Activities. Priya mentioned in my introduction that I've been a pretty significant leader within that organization, and they're actually interested in turning my survey into a product that universities that are members of NACA would be able to administer the survey to their students, but then would be able to create a dashboard where you can do some comparisons or all different types of things. So I've been exploring what that might look like. I will admit, as somebody who I feel like I just sit behind a computer and do data things all the time, as soon as they started talking to me, I was like, do I need to go get an MBA? I don't, this sounds like a business. I don't know how that works. And so that's probably where a little bit of, it's an exciting opportunity, but I'm trying to just now learn what that looks like, how those processes work, etc. So that's been a fun challenge. And then another just kind of passion project is I would really love to make adaptations of my survey for different types of schools and student identities. So, a community college I only administered my survey at D1 schools. And so that's a very different experience at a community college or schools that don't have a big football team. And then also thinking about student identity. So belonging it does look different for people of color, for people, I know there's a PhD student that reached out to me and they're using it to administer with Jewish students. And so I imagine the survey needs to be adapted differently for different types of populations. So looking into that, I think would be really exciting and rewarding. And so that's some things that I hope to do in the future. But yeah, I have some references here on the last slide, but that's my general overview of a project that's keeps me passionate and excited about working in data science and where does it fit within the bigger world of data. And yeah, so that's kind of what I had to share. So I don't know if you want to open it up to questions and I can stop sharing my screen.
That's a wonderful talk. It was very, very interesting. So please, audiences, go ahead with your questions if you have some. Or Okay, or else let me start with the questions, and I expect somebody to ask some questions because it's really a pretty interesting topic. I personally enjoyed it very much.
Thank you.
So my questions are, I have like five, six questions.
Oh,
Quickly, let
wow.
me ask.
Okay.
So the first question is the word cloud that you talked about. So that was an interesting part. So I just wanted to understand, like, did you come up with any metrics like top K words, the most important words that I'm going to capture to put it inside my model to make good predictions? Something of that sort. Did you do?
Which model are you referring to again?
Before talking about the PCA, you talked about kind of word cloud, but you used it to filter out the words, basically
Yep.
to remove the data. So you used it only to remove the input data, or you also use the word cloud to select top keywords to run into your model.
Sure. So that one I used, my survey was very basic. And when I say I'm a quantitative researcher, like I can dabble in qualitative, but I want to count my qualitative data, you know? So
Got it.
that survey, I really all it did was it said, what 10 words come to mind when you think of belonging? And then the student was free to put as many up to 10 words as they wanted. I'd say probably about half of them did include 10 words. And then some only put 4 words, which
Oh,
was fine. I still included that in my data. And then I know I described this in my dissertation, but it was interesting to me, like family was, I want to say close to half of everybody's respondents number one word. And so that um made me think, and kind of the order that they're putting those words in also I reported on, and I think made a difference. So but ultimately, to write the instrument, as long as the word was said or a root of the word, so if there was like um, happy and happiness, as long
uh-huh.
as like I combined those together,
Oh,
um,
got it. Makes sense.
then as long as it was twice, then I wrote an item for it, which some of them were kind of hard to write and positive and a negative worded item because like one of them was laptop. Well, I that's not like an innately positive and negative item, so or word. So some of them were challenging, but I did a lot of comparison of maybe what other surveys have done, etc., to write those.
Got it. That sounds good. So
Yeah.
anyone has any questions? Because I'm just going to keep asking questions. If someone wants to ask any question, please stop me, and I want to give priority to you rather than me. So unless until someone stops me, I just wanted to go ahead with my questions.
Okay.
So please feel free to stop me if you have any questions. So my next question would be, what are all the data type that you included? It's only categorical or textual, or what are all the types of data you have included for this model?
For the sense of belonging or
Yes,
for
yes.
okay. So all of them are Likert scale items. So they're all on a scale from 1 to 5. And they're all statements. So
Statements. Okay.
yeah.
I get it. Kind of a textual data. Okay. Next is, you talked about, like, at the end I saw you compared with various components and you used various models like hierarchical and some clustering and then some hierarchical regression, something of that. I think Dr. Shamsuddin has a question. So let me first ask her questions, then we
Okay.
can go ahead with mine. So she has two questions. So first question is, during your work with analyzing surveys, did you find that choice of words matter? If so, why? How?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So I mentioned that my advisor, Dr. Kai Cole, is interested in item response theory, and I think that that's one place that the choice of words can matter. I think you see that in the items that got dropped within my survey of whether a word resonated with a student. Like for example, that one that says I like to go to parties with my friends, or I'm making that up potentially a little bit, but references parties. Well, a party can be hanging out and watching a movie, but it could also be like a party, And so I think sometimes those words, it just depends on how people are interpreting them. So I think absolutely that word choice matters. And one of the things in particular, so a lot of item response theory with constructs that currently exist in the literature is about negative constructs, and so how those items perform when you're thinking of something like anger, anxiety, etc. And so there's not a ton of research on how those items that are worded differently perform for a positive construct like belonging. So that's one of the things that we're hoping to explore, but we just haven't done that yet. But I think absolutely, words matter, and I think that's super interesting. So would be kind of fun to get nerdy about and see what it looks like.
Oh, that's good. I think Dr. Shamsuddin would be okay, would have heard this answer. And maybe the second question that sounds interesting to me, but I just also she just wanted to ask to see if it makes sense even. So if a researcher wanted to figure out cognitive processing in human being as they are doing a task, say like reading paragraph or detecting bias in paragraph, right?
Mm-hmm.
So can it be done through surveys, or do we need to know how, do we need heart rate or EEG signal information, sort of things like that? So what do you think about this? Like, conducting a survey and doing a research for cognitive processing.
Yeah, I will admit that's not something I have thought about, mostly because I feel like most of my data exploration is definitely in it's in the educational sphere, so very social sciences, very working with people, but not necessarily how the science behind it, if that makes sense. And to me, the cognitive processing would definitely add the science element of it. So, and I'm just making an assumption. I would think you would need to hook someone up to a machine in some capacity to track them. But what I think would be fascinating is to do that while they take a survey and see what their processing happens as they read different items. That would be super interesting. But I don't know if the survey itself would be able to measure the cognitive processing, but maybe. I don't want to say there's no way it's out there, but I would have to look into it.
Okay. So
Yeah.
you would also say that survey can play an additional role?
I mean, I would think so. I would think that you could ask questions about what they were thinking about while they did the task, or I would think there's more information you could add to the conversation
Add
by
to the
doing the
conversation.
survey.
Yeah,
But I
that
don't
sounds
know.
interesting.
Yeah, I don't know that you could flat out measure actual cognitive processing simply with a survey. But I think you could learn a lot more about it with a survey.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
additional knowledge.
Yeah.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah.
So,
I think so too.
so I think we have time, so I would go on with my next question.
Okay.
So this is an important question that I want to talk about the trends and patterns and your overall analysis on comparing with everything. So, tell me like the history of data you have used and what pattern and trends you have understood from that and how it is going to contribute to your future uh, applications. What have you?
Is there a specific topic, I guess, that you're thinking about? Is it with sense of belonging or just more generic?
I would say like whatever you have analyzed based on like various comparisons you did, right? Like I saw ANOVA and you did
Oh,
clustering and you did like various clustering types, regression. So you might have had a comparison when you do ANOVA. I thought like maybe you would have had that analyzed the trend and patterns in that,
yeah.
like the positive spikes and dips. So I just wanted to understand like how you took the observation based on past how many years of data, like the history of data that you had, and how do you think that what kind of pattern you analyze and how it is going to impact the future?
Yeah, that's
That would
great.
be interesting to know.
Yeah, so this is my third phase of my dissertation, which I left off because I was like, y'all don't want to just hear my whole dissertation defense. But I did in my third phase, I used the data that I had collected and I started asking questions like, does it matter or does it make a difference if students are involved in a student affairs program or not? And so one of the questions I had asked on the survey was, what student organizations are you involved in? And so I categorized those responses into if the program was sponsored by student affairs or not. So like things that weren't student affairs were like jobs, like WIDS would probably be outside of student affairs, stuff like that. And then things that were student affairs were like housing, student government, things that that division organizes. And so then I looked at the differences. That's where those ANOVAs kind of came into play. And what I found, which I hope that I can continue to do some analysis like this, is that there was only one component that made a difference, but the one that made a difference was the relationships one. And so that was exciting for me as someone who worked in student affairs to see, is like, if I can get a student to be involved in one of our programs, their belonging in regards to their relationships in particular, it would make a difference than if they're not involved in anything in student affairs. And that, what a great argument to be able to go to work and say, like, hey, students, come join my thing, because it's going to make you feel like you belong here, or it has a higher likelihood of it. And so that was exciting. I did do some different comparisons. Like I looked at that pre-COVID, post, like if they started during COVID, and nothing else did I find any significant differences. But I will say, ultimately, I didn't have a giant sample. And so what I'm really excited about, we haven't done much of the analysis yet. We've just been gathering data, is that longitudinal study. So for my dissertation, I had about 600 responses. So this longitudinal study that we were doing with last year's freshmen, last fall we had about 1,800 responses. And then in the spring we had about 1,300 responses, I believe. And so I'm really excited to dive into that data, because I think there's just going to be more data that might say something, you know.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
I'm really excited to see and be able to ask some of those questions, like, does it make a difference if you go to the Colvin or not? I'm not sure, but let's look at it.
Got it. So how many years of data basically you used for this, or like till date you have used for the model prediction? How many years of data?
From my dissertation,
Yes.
yeah, that was just conducted at one point in time. So it was just one semester that I
One
at
semester.
3
Okay.
universities. Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to have one question. Like, you're saying like you used one semester data and you're going to use it for future. Have you worked? I mean, this is a general question, not specific to the ones that you talked here. I mean, this is a general thing. So,
Sure.
have you ever worked on the observation period, like past 1 years or past 2 years and past 3 years? When you just work with the models with just past 1 year data, what is the difference that you make? Past 2 years data, what is the difference that you make? Past 3 years data, what is the difference that you make? Something like the observation periods did you take and make comparisons for? Do you have an idea, or like have you ever worked with such kind of um, methods
Yeah,
before?
I think if I'm understanding your question right, we're actually doing that with the OTHOT model. And
Okay.
so I saw the last year was kind of the first time that certain people started to see some of those numbers of the OTHOT model. It was a lot of folks who are pretty cognizant in the data sense of being able to understand it, but also knowing that you have to talk about it kind of carefully, in the sense of you know, it's not prescriptive. It's not saying like there's no way you're coming back here next semester. Um, so we kind of carefully started looking at it last year. And then this year we've been able to, which this is kind of described on their webpage, their different timeline and phases of how they're using the OTHOT model here at OSU. So this year we're starting to you know, create lists from it of, if you have the time to talk to 10 students, these are the 10 students that you can make the biggest difference with, you know, like kind of being able to do some of that more recommending. But I think we found that, you know, as we add another year into our data, or the model becomes a year
Yeah.
older, it's become much stronger. And
Yeah.
we've seen changes in the variables that pop up as the strongest thing. So like one that we didn't see at all last year that now I see sometimes pop into the model is that it makes a difference if the student is considered a legacy, which I think is defined as they've had either a previous parent or student attend or sibling attend OSU. They're then labeled as a legacy. And that wasn't really popping up much last year, but now I've seen it in a few things, and how that can make a difference. So, but you only know those things likely with time. Your sibling has to go here first
That's
for
true.
you to even show up as a legacy. So, yeah, I think it's been interesting to see how it grows and changes. And I think that we've been able to see we're able to change our practices accordingly, and how that then informs the model. So okay, we implemented the strategy, we've helped this problem, so now maybe that variable leaves the model because we've fixed it. So
that will be interesting.
yeah, it is interesting. And I guess I really like that piece of feeling like I'm making a difference, because I think it's easy to get lost in the data and not see like the impacts of the work that you're doing.
That's true.
And I also, in my role, I don't make any decisions, which is really funny because sometimes people will be like, no, I want you to tell me the answer. Like, what should I do? And I'm like, I don't know. I just have the data that I can show you. And I'm not in charge of anything really. So I kind of enjoy that role, as well as it's like I get to just help people have the conversation and help remind them of how they should be looking at it. But ultimately it's their job to
Got
use.
it. I have one more question from Dr. Shamsuddin. So this is
Okay.
another interesting question. So if there was an AI that helped with increasing students' sense of belonging, what would it look like?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I guess selfishly, I would think that it would be interesting to look at the 4 components that kind of came out in my survey. So is there something that impacts relationships? Is there something that would address feelings and be able to kind of help you moderate those, or maybe even just be aware of what your feelings are? I think there could be a piece within there. That academic support and focus, I think, do we have AI resources that can provide that support so that people feel like they have it? Or is it a balance where, we don't, maybe we make the decision to not have AI because it's important to have a faculty member know your face and see you in their classroom. Maybe that's what makes a difference. I'm not sure. So I think you could find a balance of that. And school spirit as an AI tool, I think could be interesting. But I think so. We actually have a new AI like chatbot. They've called, what is it called? It's named after one of the Pete's Pet Posse dogs. But they just launched it this semester, where you can literally just chat with them about anything, but it's through the university. And so I think that's their goal, is they're trying to not necessarily make it more efficient for people to not have to answer small questions, but for it to be more like, oh, I'm sitting in my dorm room and I don't know what to do. I can text the chatbot and then I can go find something to do where I would belong, rather than just continuing to sit there and not knowing how to get on the calendar, or, just makes it kind of, while it's a fake person, it still feels like a person, if that makes sense, I guess. So I don't know. That's what I think it would look like.
Yeah, sure. Like, I mean, these days AI are common now. Even I see a lot of teachers, AI teachers from Indian universities too. So they just keep a name
Yeah.
and you can even chat with them like, hey teacher, like, I wanted to know about this particular coursework chapters and things like that. So that's like kind of funny.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think it's interesting.
Yeah, so I just wanted to share my screen and show the students how to pose their questions, because they might be having something or we are running out of time and they might be shy to ask here. So I just wanted to really show the how to use the questionnaire. So let me share my screen. Please let me know if you're able to view it. I hope you're able to view my screen, I guess.
Yep. It
Yeah,
looks like
that's
your
good.
email.
Yeah, just a minute. Yeah, so here we have our website. So the goal of this event, I have posted our website. So you can open the website So once you open it, this particular forum is common for the students as well as the speaker, so they can ask the questions and the speakers can answer it. So if you go down, you can see building scalable predictive models. So this is the overarching theme for our current WIDS, and it's like 2024. And you can see the Q&A form here. So you just click it and then go and submit forms. And you can see the various speakers here. So to whomever you have questions, just select them. If you want how many other questions you have, you just keep sending them and just submit it. And enter your answers for the speakers to enter their answers. So I would strongly, this is an open forum and then open website. So there is no any access restrictions. So anyone can log in and just post their questions, and the speakers, like I can send out a reminder for the speakers. If they have any questions, I can send out a reminder to post the questions. I would strongly encourage all the students to post some questions, because we have very good speakers now, and this is a very great opportunity for everyone to ask any questions that you have, and you can get clarified. And this is something that we really organized for you guys to utilize it, and I really expect the students to utilize this forum to ask their questions. And this is the time that you can reach out to these speakers after that, like, after this event is done, like the semester is done, they might be busy with their own work. So I encourage you to post your questions. And it was a great session, Dr. Kaila. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. I think most of the students will get inspired by this. Yeah, I think even the students can pose their questions after the four speakers are done, but I'm just enforcing to do it as soon as possible, so that within this semester at least, like, we have till December. So it will be easy for the speakers to answer, so that they have some time, because they'll have like a vacation after the final exams are done. So these forums are open, but I encourage students to post the questions within this semester. So that's my plead or suggestions. So that's all. I think it's already time. And thank you so much, Dr. Kayla, and also to the audiences for attending this talk. It was very interesting and encouraging, and I'm sure that some people would have got motivated by all these talks.
Yeah. Well, thank you for inviting me.
Sure. Thank you. See you all in the next event next week. Bye.
Bye.